Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Avid Connect Live APAC 2020. Very happy to have you here today and very happy to have an event happening during APAC time. My name is Daniel Lovell. I am the pre-sales manager for the APAC region. Today, we're primarily going to be talking about immersive audio, Atmos, and using that for music and post-production. So most of you many of you have joined on Zoom. You can ask a question by submitting it on the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. If you're on one of the other platforms, we will do our best to gather those questions and pass them on to our panelists so that they can answer them for you. We hope that you really enjoyed the session today, and thank you for joining. To start things off, we have an announcement, a short message from our CEO and President, Jeff Rossiker.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to all of Avid's valued customers. Along with Avid's Asia Pacific team, I'm thrilled you've joined us today. We have a lot to share with you. These are unprecedented times for our friends throughout APAC and the entire world. At Avid, we're rapidly assimilating lessons learned to drive new types of innovation to boost the performance and the opportunity for customers of all types. This means more powerful solutions for flexible remote working and ensuring business continuity, while empowering creative teams to collaborate faster and more easily and at greater scale. After all, the world's appetite for great content has increased dramatically during the pandemic. Let's be ready to support that demand. I know the Avid APAC team has been planning diligently for this valuable time with you. We have live product demonstrations and insightful presentations lined up. Immersive sound, post-production, and music creation are just a few of the hot topics we'll cover with you today. The community across Asia Pacific plays a very large role in shaping Avid's vision and how we deliver that to you. As on all days, today we want to listen to your voice and work with you to make sure we can make a collective brighter future. I hope you find today's events very helpful and hopefully even inspiring. So thanks again.
So let me very quickly go over our agenda today. To begin with, we're going to talk with Greg Chin, Avid Audio Product Evangelist at Avid, with Matt Lang, a producer, composer, musician, and DJ, about mixing in Dolby Atmos for music. Then we're going to talk to Christine Thomas from Dolby about sound strategy for Dolby Atmos mixing and music for music. Then I'm going to be speaking to Will Files, sound designer, sound supervisor, re-recording mixer, about using Atmos in film, television, and streaming services, OTT. Then we're going to finish out the session today with Ozzy Sutherland from Netflix, talking about how they're pushing really hard for extremely high quality audio, and one of those deliverables so often is Atmos. So we're going to have a really great talk with all of these people today. So to start things off, let's turn things over to Greg and Matt to talk about mixing music in Dolby Atmos.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name's Greg Chin. As Daniel said, I'm the audio evangelist for Avid. It's a real pleasure to be with everyone. Obviously, we wanted to be able to do this live and in person, and it is my great wish to have been there to do this live. Obviously, we want to keep everyone safe, and we want everybody to be okay. So, we're doing what we can. So, it's great to have everyone here. Again, it's a real pleasure to be here. But for the next little few minutes, I'd like to introduce a good friend of mine, but he is more than that. He is an amazing musician, a composer, amazing DJ, and I've had the pleasure of playing a lot of his music in my own DJ sets over the years, and it's a real pleasure to have him here. So I'd like to introduce Matt Lang to the stage, I guess is what I would say. So Matt, where are you? Are you here?
I am. I need you to restart my video.
Okay.
My video.
There you are. There he is. Welcome, Matt. So what time is it in Los Angeles right now?
6 p.m.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Let's just get right into it. So, first of all, how are you? You know, during this pandemic, are you keeping safe? You feeling okay? Doing well?
I mean, because I work in a studio all day long by myself. So unless a guitar can give me COVID, I'm pretty okay.
Well, that's thankfully I don't think that's the case. So I think you're okay. So let's dive right into it. You know, over the past couple of months. So, well, first of all, you were one of the first, I guess, an early adopter as far as creating music, mixing music in Atmos and Dolby Atmos, and that you've kind of led the charge, so to speak. And I know that there are a lot of other musicians and a ton of different genres that kind of look to you as kind of kind of the gold standard. So, but specifically during the pandemic, you've been really prolific, and you've been writing a ton of new music, in that room there. And you actually are now going to be releasing an album, which was all written and started off as an Atmos project. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I basically wrote a quarantine album, so to speak, and I never actually planned on this being the case, but we also didn't think it would go on as long as it has. So initially it was just some music I was writing just to kind of keep myself occupied and using inspiration from everything that was going on in the world, and the uncertainty and the anxiety and all that. And that eventually grew into a much bigger project, which turned into this album, which is the longest album I've ever done. It's on a CD by the margin of 1 minute.
Wow.
And
you are doing CDs as well, so you're doing physical product for it as well.
Physical is nice. And
I love it. Yeah.
It matters to be able to hold something in your hand, I truly believe.
Yeah.
So it turned into this album, and this one song in particular that I'm showing you, which was mixed in Atmos, this was actually written because Dolby was launching Atmos both on Amazon and Tidal, so it could actually finally be commercially accessible. And that's a new thing, because previously you'd have to be in a theater that was actually equipped for Atmos.
Right.
I wrote this record specifically with the intention of it being mixed in Atmos, which is different than all the other works that I've actually done in Atmos, because usually before I'd be writing it in a stereo format and then later converting it to Atmos.
Right.
This from the get-go, I already knew it was going to be in Atmos, and that changes your creative choices. So that was kind of the I guess the initial, or one of the inspirations of this song. But on top of it, and which is actually a big deal, is I mixed this in my home. And as you can kind of see from this little screen here, I'm not surrounded by speakers.
Right.
So I was actually, and this is the first time I've ever done this, I was able to do the mix just in headphones. And that to me is actually kind of groundbreaking, because previously, anytime I did an Atmos mix, I would have to go into a Dolby studio or a different studio that was equipped with Atmos. And this meant suddenly I could actually just do it all from home, and it translates absolutely okay. So
that's really cool. So basically, I mean, just to kind of quickly run through what you're using. So you're on a Mac Mini, I believe. You're running Pro Tools Ultimate, HD native Thunderbolt, and you're also utilizing the Dolby Audio Bridge, right?
Yeah, I'm connected into the Dolby Atmos renderer. That's just via the digital audio bridge, the Dolby.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, instead of just thinking about it or talking about it, maybe you can show us a couple of things and, maybe talk us through specifically what some of the ideas. So obviously now, since you're writing this from scratch and you've got Atmos kind of, there at your fingertips, so to speak, your design choices and your creative choices were now, you had a lot of freedom because you're writing it and then basically assigning stuff to objects as you're going along. So maybe, walk us through a couple of things that you can feel free, share your screen, and we'd love to give a listen and have you walk us through some stuff.
Go to the screen right now, and we will go from there. So everybody should see my screen now.
Yep. Do not leave the meeting.
I'm just going to play a small snippet of this and talk about some of the choices of the Atmos choices that I made.
This is all we have.
hope you heard that. I didn't myself because of Zoom hasn't caught up with Atmos audio yet, so I've had to jerry rig this a little bit to get it to work. But so the first thing that I always think about, especially with Atmos, is there is this synthesizer blip. It came from a modular synthesizer, and before the beat drops, it's pretty much stereo, and it sounds like this soloed. And the way I mix that is, for this, I'm just using the basic Avid panner, and it's going directly to my 7.1.2 bed. So this is not flying around your head. It's just going to basically be a stereo file that's going to sit slightly ahead of you. And the reason for that is ultimately when the beat drops, it gets converted to a different channel. And on this channel, this is not using the native Atmos panning plugin, but this is actually using the Dolby Atmos music panner. And what you'll see here is this is actually, I just drew a lot of automation on both the X and the Y axis. And I did this just with the mouse. I didn't use a controller or anything like that. But what happens is I'm going to play both of them. But so you have the stereo version of the arpeggio. And once it gets to here, now it's dancing around your head. And especially if you're in a studio that is really equipped for this in a way that simple headphones and speakers aren't. But this should actually, I should say, what I'm sending to you right now is actually the binaural headphone mix. So if you're listening to this in headphones, theoretically, you should be hearing the binaural mix, which is basically a headphone version of the Atmos mix. So you should see the effect of that. But what I wanted to do, this was actually an element that when I was writing it, I thought, okay, I'm going to have this arpeggio and I want this thing to really dance around you. And it's kind of this, it's a floaty arpeggio. It doesn't need to be dead center. And it's just an opportunity. And so much about Atmos is really taking opportunities, because this is the wild west of mixing right now. Atmos is such an emerging technology that there aren't any rules yet. And that's personally why I feel really excited about it, is because I can do whatever I want. And no one's ever told me this is how you do it. There is no right way. And I don't like rules personally in general. So this is one of those things that is really exciting to me. But what I've done in particular as well with this arpeggio is I've basically kept the original stereo file.
Mm-hmm.
I kept all the reverbs and all the delays. So these stay basically, you know, front center. So while you have this arpeggio dancing around you, the reverbs are still staying right there. And something else going on there too is the reverbs themselves are actually ducked to the kick drum. So if we take this kick drum, you can visually see it if I brought this track up and it's right underneath the kicks. But you can see every time the kick hits, there's a duck in the volume of the effect itself. So everything sucks around the kick. And this is probably a good segue to talk about the drums too, because I love drums and I love percussion in general. And I make all my own drums. It's something that's really fun to me. And I also find that it is pretty intrinsic to my creative process. Especially when everything is, I'm creating this is a really long kick right here. And that's because I want this to be this doom kind of thing. And everything's going to suck up underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I do all the drums and I keep that synth going, it's just this big sucking swelling effect. That's not an Atmos trick. That's just a basic Pro Tools editing trick. But it's all really effective. So let's talk about the drums, since that's something that gets a lot of Atmos love. And the first is our kicks. And there are multiple kicks. This was originally a much bigger session. It was about 130 channels or something like that. And ultimately, for the sake of mixing an Atmos, and this is what I've actually always done, is I stem it down. And the reason I do that is a lot of it's for CPU, because CPU use can get kind of intense if you're using a lot of objects. But on top of it, I layer a lot of sounds, and I don't need 12 different shakers spread out all over the place. I can kind of pare my shakers down. So I have my kicks here, and these are just going straight to the Avid panner, the bed. And the other thing that when you're mixing in Atmos, it's a little bit different because you're really living in the center of the mix. You're not necessarily just being blasted by two speakers in front. So just psychologically, it changes your mixing choices because I don't want, yes, I want the kick to be centered, but I don't want it to be dead center. I don't want it to be up the front at the center. I want it to feel it through my entire body. So I want that to be basically the radius. I guess I want it to be like the epicenter of the hurricane, if that makes sense. And so consequently, where I've placed this kick, it's literally dead center of the room. And then I'm sending a fair amount of low end also to the sub. Not a ton, and this is something because I did it in headphones. I didn't want to overdo it. If I did this in a studio, I might have pushed it up a little bit more, but for the sake of this, it worked absolutely okay. So the kick is there. Then I have claps, and these also go directly into the Avid panner. But these are panned super hard left and right. And again, it's not front and center, it's right to the sides of your ears.
And you can really, you can really feel that and get that sense of space thanks to the way you panned it.
Yeah, and then there's also kind of like an effect that's kind of a pre-attack to the clap. I call it crackle. It's basically crackle. I think it came from dry ice or something like that. But this is going through the Dolby panner again, and that is there's a fair amount of automation on this as well. So sometimes it's minimal automation. And I'm just going to solo that. So the crackle starts behind your head. And then as it basically eclipses into the clap, then it comes full center. So it's just a way to psychoacoustically trick you and make it more exciting. If we add it with the kick and the other clap again, it's a hip sound. There's really no other way to put it. But then later, this track, it has some other crackly stuff. And this is where I took an opportunity to really make it fly around your head a lot more. So now this thing really dances around. And again, it's just because I can. It's an opportunity and it's exciting. So another thing I have going on, I have these clicks. And you look, I mean, they're basically just they're clicks. But what you can do with the Dolby panner, which is actually, I mean, it's such a cool feature, is it has a sequencer built into it. So every step of the sequence, each single one of these, every one of these is a different panning position. So every quarter note, you're going to dance around from, it's going to go here, it's going to go there, going to go there, going to go there, going to go there, going to go there. So these little clicks are always just ping-ponging around your head, just kind of giving a little bit of atmosphere. And again, it's all little things that kind of just all add up together. I have some glitchy sounds as well, and these are also going through the Dolby panner, and they're also doing the same kind of thing. Except this time, if you look at it, it's also, the steps are quarter notes like before, but what's great about this sequencer is it doesn't have to be discrete steps. So for me, every motion is a discrete gesture. So over the course of every individual beat, there's going to be a motion that happens. So as I play this, you're going to see all the different motions that these glitches and how they fly around your head. And that's something, I mean, you can't do that any other way. It's the coolest thing. I love really sounds, and I love automation, obviously. So to be able to do this is just on a creative level, purely exciting.
That's amazing, Matt. Thank you for sharing some of that. So we have some questions coming in. I know we've just got a couple more minutes here, but let me just go ahead and maybe if it's cool if you toss a couple of these questions your way. So one of the first questions I'll ask is, as far as getting, you're working on this album. And by the way, when can we hear the album? When will that be released?
It'll be out in 2 weeks.
Couple of weeks. All right, excellent. So I'll talk a little bit about where folks can actually hear it in Atmos. But of course, you also have a stereo mix, I assume, of the album available as well. So as it pertains to that, You've done all this work specifically in Atmos. You're doing it at home. You're leveraging a bunch of great, really cool technology. The render, so the ADM file, once you get that, basically stemmed out, are you going back to kind of remix and retweak the mix for stereo, or are you just allowing the mix that you've done to kind of then be automatically stemmed to stereo as well?
I completed the stereo mix first. And
Okay.
based on the completed stereo mix, then I stemmed everything out.
Okay. Got it. Excellent. So another question for you. Working in Atmos, obviously a lot of the the plugins, whether they're the Avid ones, the Dolby ones, or whatever other plugins that exist specifically for the immersive space. Obviously, there's an extra layer of visualization. I think that's obviously you want to use your ears. That's the most important thing to do. But it does seem that there's a kind of a psychological correlation and something happening with the visualization. How important is that to be able to kind of see and visualize literally where objects are being placed while you're working on automation and things like that?
I think it's helpful. Again, your ears are ultimately what matters the most, but just to have a visual representation of what you see is definitely helpful. And a lot of times when I'm, for instance, recording automation, I'm doing that visually. I'm setting this to be in touch latch mode, and if I play it, let's solo that. Say a recording. Yeah, actually, this is a bad example because this one has all this programming in it already. But let's just say I zeroed it out. Yes, this is having the visual setting is really effective because then I know exactly what's going on here.
Right.
The automation.
Right.
So yeah, it does make a big difference.
Sure. I think we'll take one last question here. So Alex Chalkoff is asking, are you ever worried about the phase coherency by having the same amount of the kick going to all the speakers, but the ceiling should work well in headphones, but he feels that you might run into issues in a big room pretty quickly. He wants to give it a try. But is there a different mindset or a different way you kind of approach that to kind of make sure that you're not having phase issues?
I don't think about it at all.
Okay, you just kind of go for it, and you're doing it and tweaking it as you go along.
On top of that, but I mean, it's it's a mono signal, so there's nothing weird phasey with the kick already, and in terms of its place in the mix, I mean, if it's tuned, if the room's tuned,
yeah. Well, I mean, clearly the results are nothing short of just really outstanding. Everything that I've heard that you've done in Atmos thus far has just been stellar, and we can't wait for the album, Matt. Thank you so much for taking the time to come hang out with us. I wish again we were doing this live in Asia somewhere, but maybe next year. And again, thank you so much, Matt. Continue to stay safe. We will be looking for the album in a couple of weeks. And again, everybody, thank you, Matt, and we'll talk to you soon. So I'm going to ask, if you stop your screen share, Matt, any last words that you want to send to your fans here?
No, just thanks for checking this out. It's exciting technology. It really is. And I don't say that as someone who's here being a guest on this. I've been working in Atmos for 5 years, and I wouldn't do that if I didn't like it. I really, truly do find it exciting. And the ability to home now really opens up a world of opportunity. So it's really
awesome.
Great stuff.
Well, again, appreciate it, Matt. Continue to stay safe, and we will we'll see you and hear you soon. So everyone give it up for Matt Lang. You can't hear the applause, but I guarantee you it's all happening. Thanks, Matt. So yeah, if you can go ahead and as you were, say hi to the cats for me. And you can actually, you're welcome to stay, hang out. But if you want to mute your mic, stop your video, and we will continue on with our Connect event. Thank you, Matt. So, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Matt is just such an amazing musician, such a great supporter of just music in general, but certainly in the immersive space. We're very lucky to have his music. We're very lucky to have his voice as well. So moving right along, next up we have another really special guest, and really excited about this one. So please welcome. We're going to talk a little bit. We're going to have a nice little chat about Dolby specifically, and the partnership that Dolby and Avid have, and specifically what Dolby's got kind of up their sleeve. So please welcome Christine Thomas. She is in charge of music partnerships at Dolby Laboratories. Christine, hi, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm great. It is so good to see you. So good to hear you. Thank you so much for being here.
Tough to follow, though, I'm going to say, man.
Well, that's partially your fault, right? You've created this.
Yeah.
You guys have created some amazing technology. Matt's done, doing some great music. It's a great partnership. So first of all, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Are you staying safe?
Well, thanks for asking. Yep, staying safe at home, pinned to the computer, pinned to Zoom.
Aren't we all? Aren't we all? Well, again, thank you for joining us. So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about, not that much time in which to do it. So I think maybe the best place to start is actually with you. You're doing so much incredible work with your team at Dolby, but maybe it might be great for the audience, some of the folks here who don't know who you are and what your role is at Dolby. Maybe you can kind of give us a little bit about your background and what you do at Dolby.
I'd be pleased to. So music partnerships team is essentially a team of one of my colleagues says unicorns. We all have a various depth and breadth of technical background and capability, as well as liking to be very, very close and personal with creatives across the globe, right? So what do? We actually work with labels, with independents, with the creatives themselves, with the studios, not just the owners and operators, but we get in there, we get our hands dirty with the engineers. Our goal really is we also do work with the streaming partners teams. So they're not only their industry relations teams, but their operational teams. And our goal really is to put the tools in the hands of the amazing creatives across the universe and give them everything that they need to be capable, the education and the comfort and the prowess, and also the connections, right? Just helping to draw connections across the industry so that people can actually find outlets for their work. And also then, of course, work with amazing people, both on the Dolby side and partners such as Avid, who can help us to connect all of the components of the ecosystem. And I think that's the fundamental part. So I see my role as fundamentally not just a relationship builder, but really hopefully a puzzle component, right? I mean, just really helping to put all of those pieces together. And in terms of our relationship with Avid, it obviously goes without saying, several of the people who are on my immediate team and very close partners, such as, David Gould and Carrie Thomas and a multitude of others across our organization, are very close to Avid, not just because Avid is an imperative partner, but because Avid's such an excellent partner, right? And I say that with absolute, genuine transparency. It's because it's a fundamental in terms of us sharing common DNA and in terms of how we approach the creative industry. So our approach is, I think, based very much on how our company was originally founded, and that's with a deep love and respect for the creative community. And our goal really is to not only build tools that deliver upon what they need, but also really learn their language and help them, again, to deliver on the vision of their art. I love hearing from people like Matt because it tells me that it's going well, right? We're doing something right. I'm inspired about that. But make no mistake, he's a take no prisoners feedback provider as well, right?
Yeah, we know that.
Right? You have to give us that tough love too, so that we know what's working and what's not. So, but so for me, I actually come from originally the movie industry, then television. And so from Warner Brothers Technicolor, I ran a large global operation there, which was around, our global production network. So my whole career has been around, again, empowering the production community at large with the tools that they need to be successful.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, Christine. And Anthony, thank you for those kind words. I mean, we are absolutely honored, and we love being partnered with Dolby. So it looks like your picture might have frozen. Are you still there?
Still here. Can you
Yep.
hear me?
There you go. Yeah.
No,
All right. Cool.
the loveliness
Yeah.
today.
The wonders of the pandemic technology. So one of the things I wanted to talk about and ask you about and get your thoughts on. So that, we kind of call this section with you a little bit of, we're really calling it the, what is the immersive sound strategy for Dolby. So that's obviously kind of a very open-ended title, by design. But one of the things I wanted to kind of, and maybe I'll start that discussion with this. Obviously, we have this partnership between Avid and Dolby, and I think a lot of folks see that partnership for very obvious reasons, right? We've got some really great technologies that work well together. We're both kind of, in a sense, industry standards. So there's a lot of automatic and organic things to the relationship that makes sense. Having Atmos really, kind of built into Pro Tools Ultimate is just, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? And so to speak.
Absolutely.
However, one of the things that I really find to be inspiring on a lot of different levels, and I guess I'm leading you with this, but to me, this is a big part in my mind. We've never really talked about it, but again, this is something that I think many of us see through the partnership is the way you guys handle and work with and partner with all of your users. So whether they're folks on the audio post side, I'm really seeing it as a musician myself and a producer myself. I'm really seeing that on the music side, and that's really inspiring to me. So I always talk about this part of the relationship, and this part of what we consider, or I consider your part of your strategy, is that you treat this almost like a record label, but a good one, not one that's trying to take advantage of their artists, but a label who's really helping to give the artists what they need. And then you fast forward, you're also making sure that you serve the listener, the fans at the end of, at the end of the chain, the people who are going to put on the headphones or, listen to a big immersive mix. I'm assuming that's a big part of your strategy, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I mean, again, obviously, yes, it's certainly a practice across Dolby to, again, as you know, our history is to get very, very close to the creative community. I'll just tell you, we have very personal stories, each of us, right? But I actually joined Dolby with absolute honesty because of the technology. I fell in love with what I heard and what I saw, in Dolby Atmos and in Dolby Vision. And so for me, it's truly a passion. When I first heard Atmos music, I was so moved. I thought, we have to get this out there into the world. Everyone needs to know about this, right? So what I've also learned, though, is when it comes to technologies, you either have to solve a problem or you have to deliver on a dream, right? You have to give somebody a piece of magic. And what we've heard from the creative community is that their music, their art is trapped somewhere, right? It's trapped in stereo. And so what we want to do is just really peel that off, open that opportunity up, and give them everything that they can get. But it's a multi-pronged approach, to your point, and it's complex, right? So I say all day, we're Swiss Army knives, right? We're doing, the business end of things, and we're negotiating here with, let's say, the streaming service to make sure that the right bit of maybe marketing goes out, and that's in support of the creative. And then, we're negotiating here with the label to make sure that the right priorities are done, that studios are enabled, and so on. But ultimately, it's really about delivering, again, the promise to the creative so that they have everything that they need to become so powerful and so passionate that they have control over their art, right? And that's what I love. And one of the ways that we think about doing that is, okay, what are the tools that they're missing? What are we hearing from them? What do they need? And that's actually how we came to Avid Play. I was extremely proud to work with you guys on Avid Play this year. That is, I'll be completely honest, a thrilling work for us, because from my perspective, I absolutely love working with the major labels. They're believe it or not, they've just been, I know for some indies, they may have it, a little, they want to strike out on their own, and I completely get that. And we want to support all of that. And again, Avid Play is an example of that. But I also want to just say, like, the majors have been very supportive of things like Avid Play. Right. But what I love about Avid Play is that we're truly putting the power in the hands of the creative to decide where how to run their own business, how they want to distribute, to whom they want to distribute, in what format they want to distribute, et cetera. So it's really empowering, again, the creative. And how we do that, yeah, we're tired. But we do really love it. And you'll hear that whether you're talking to Carrie Thomas or, Aaron Venables or Ben Guybars or any number of people on my team. And certainly, again, I'll continue to give a nod to David Gould and his team because, we're arm in arm with him every day. But it's imperative that we again, that's the primary focus. And so everything we do has to be in service of the artist, because the nature of our actual business model is not here, but it's absolutely fundamentally dependent on the creative actually and truly loving the tools. It won't work if I sell you. I sell the dream. That's what I sell.
Oh, you're selling it. You're selling it well. So, where do you think? And this is kind of a general question. We've got a couple of questions coming in. I'll make sure we get to those in a minute. But where do you see this whole part of Dolby? With everything having to do with music, where do you see this in 5 years, 10 years? What's your hope?
Yeah, I will tell you that it's thrilling to me to be able to very honestly say that all of the creatives that we've demonstrated to are persuaded by Atmos, right? If you feel it, it's Atmos is what I like to say, and you can feel it, right? And the adoption is really taking off. There's a lot more to do, obviously, more streaming services to enable and more devices that we want to have playback on. But that scale is actually accelerating exponentially. And I mean, just so I do my part here, there are actually hundreds of millions of devices that are Dolby Atmos enabled. So it's building that awareness and doing that not only marketing, but really communication and awareness building with the creative community as well, so that they can tell that story, right? So where I see it on every streaming service and every device.
I love it. I love it. So, we've been talking a little bit about the partnership that we have, between Avid and Dolby. I kind of gave my thoughts, on that. You've given some of your thoughts on that. Outside of the technical part of that partnership, I mean, what are some things that you would like to see, maybe, and it's very open-ended. Obviously, we're not going to, talk about roadmap specifically, but what are some things you'd like to see happen more? I mean, obviously, I just mentioned 5 years, 10 years, but we all I think we all want to make things easier for the creators and make things easier for the listener and the viewer at the end of the day. What are some things that we can do right now to kind of help make that happen? Meaning, when I say we, I'm really talking about the audience, the folks who are adopting or thinking about adopting, starting to work in Atmos. What are some things they should be looking at or thinking about as they move towards that?
Yeah, I mean, what I think is interesting about what's happened during this period this year, where so many of us are again trapped on Zoom calls. What's exciting is, in fact, we just have a very recent release, an update for our binaural tools, and it's what this time has brought is an opportunity for people to reevaluate tool sets and to get closer and to become more and more collaborative and inventive and things like this. And Matt was talking about it earlier, but the ability to then the flexibility of mixing to some degree or another as you prefer on headphones, and test that translation and understand the opportunity there to scale your workflow, if not your mix. I think that's tremendous. So what I would love to see people doing more of is trying that out, have a listen and experiment with, again, this latest release is just delicious. I'm really proud of what the team has done. And I think, again, open your mind and explore those tool sets and explore those possibilities and try something new and compose from the beginning and make it part of your fundamental workflow. Because the other thing is that there can be more and more content that we can enjoy from people if they make it part of the original process.
Yeah.
And maybe just take that risk and believe that it's not necessarily harder, because one thing that's really cool about the music community is that they are actually technologists. They're early adopters, right? They're inventors and so on. And again, Matt is a terrific example of that.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent answer. So you actually answered one of the questions that we've got coming through. So Andrew Evans was asking, curious to see if of any plans in the works to expand the availability to creators. And I think you just kind of answered that. So you've just had an update, on the binaural set of the tools. But I guess maybe I'll take part of that question. Of course, Christine, if you want to jump in at any point, please feel free. over the life of what Dolby Atmos in its existence has continued to, you guys have continued to update the software. Obviously now being able to, just Matt being able to work at home using, leveraging the Dolby Audio Bridge, Pro Tools Ultimate. We're continuing to just push forward and to make sure that we just have the tools available to folks in better and easier ways. Certainly, and you can speak to this, this pandemic has kind of, in a sense, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So I know that at Avid, we've taken that whole idea of folks being able to work remotely at home, whether they're working in mono, stereo, or in a total immersive space. We've taken that idea very seriously. So we know that we're going to continue pushing that envelope and making sure that we bring stuff to the table. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we're busier than ever because of it, which is a great story. So what we're focused on too is when I say putting tools in the hands, some of that is educational as well. More videos, more webinars, more quick starts, right? More documentation, et cetera, but things to make it easier, and certainly reach out and let us know if you need a hand. But when I say we're busier than ever, it's absolutely true, because again, that on-ramp has been significant. And again, Avid Play is a really, really exciting part of that. It has allowed more artists to onboard their music directly to whichever both services as they like. And that's exciting. And we're seeing that scale every week, actually. So more of that. Yeah.
Awesome. So I've just got two more quick ones, and I think we're good. Leighton Glenn one is asking, and this is the question that I know we've been getting asked a ton as well, certainly with all the Apple announcements. Where'd it go? Yeah, and Danny Law had a similar question as well. So does Dolby have any plans around working with the Apple spatial audio development with everything happening there with the Apple codec? I mean, of course, again, if you don't want to talk about specific roadmap, of course don't, but anything you can mention there?
Well, so just to clarify, so Dolby Atmos the AirPods are delivering a Dolby Atmos experience for AV content today, right?
Right.
Very excited about that and very encouraged about the promise of the future of that.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. So then we've pretty much answered that one for Danny as well. Same answer. Christine, we're so very thankful for your time. It continues here at Avid. It continues to be a real pleasure and honor partnering with Dolby, and we cannot wait for what's to come. There's a lot more work to be done. We're happy to do it with you. And again, thank you so much for the time. And we will see you soon, I hope, in person.
Greg, it's an absolute pleasure always. Take care.
Thanks, Christine. Cheers. Bye-bye. All right, so yeah, give it up for Christine Thomas. Really great to have Dolby here in the room, so to speak, with us. So I think with that, we'll continue on. There are a couple of questions that continue to come in. There's a question that was here earlier. Let me just quickly answer that, and then I can move into the next portion of the webinar here. So someone by the name of Nick was asking, do we think it's possible, or do we think that working this way in Dolby Atmos, I'm assuming, can achieve a better mix in stereo than working the old-fashioned way, which was really just working in the stereo mix? So I think the general answer, I think most people, myself as included, and Daniel can talk about this, and Will can talk about this later. I think working in the immersive space really actually helps to inform the stereo mix, and really at certain points allows certain parts of songs to be a lot more dynamic, bigger, and have more space and more depth, specifically because you're mixing, from the get-go in an immersive environment. So I think the general answer there, Nick, is yeah. I think working this way, utilizing Dolby Atmos and Pro Tools, is a great way to actually better your stereo mix. So that's a general answer. I mean, there's certain specifics that we could spend hours talking through, but the general answer I think would be yes there. So let's go ahead and move on. So I think for the next 10, 15 minutes or so, it is my turn to talk a little bit about the Avid solutions for Dolby Atmos, specifically as it pertains to music. So coming up after me, Daniel Lovell, Will Files, they're going to be talking a lot about Dolby Atmos and its use in film, television, OTT. in that space. Obviously at the top of this whole thing, we talked to Matt, we just spoke to Christine, and we've been really talking about music. I'm a musician myself. I'm a music producer. I'm based here in Miami, Florida, and I'm an electronic dance music producer. So actually, my next album will be delivered in Atmos, so I'm really excited about that. But so while Daniel is actually going to talk through some of the actual Avid portfolio in a greater depth, I figured what might be kind of interesting is to kind of talk through really what it means, as far as Avid, what we're doing in that space. So it's all the same portfolio, right? So I'll quickly go over some of that. Excuse me. And then Christine mentioned the work that we've partnered together and that we've done with Avid Play, and I'll talk specifically about that because to me that's kind of the missing piece, or not missing piece, but the last piece of the puzzle as it pertains to a musician being able to not only create in the immersive space with Dolby Atmos and Pro Tools, but then delivering that mix, those immersive mixes, and getting them out to their fans. And we're really proud of the work that we've done there. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll kind of give a quick walkthrough. Again, this part of it will be very, very high level, very simple, mostly because Daniel's going to do such an amazing job kind of covering this. And again, it's exactly the same portfolio. So really, as it pertains to what is the setup for working in Pro Tools and working with Dolby Atmos, it's quite simple. There are really kind of three parts to that, right? So that you've got your Pro Tools systems, then you've got your monitoring, your I/O. So that's how your inputs, your outputs, being able to get ingest your audio, record audio, whether if you're tracking stuff, drums, keyboards, whatever it might be, and then how you're getting that stuff out, and then of course how you're listening to that. So we've got some great stuff happening on that side as well. And I mentioned Pro Tools is the heart of this entire thing, right? The other part of the Avid portfolio really kind of centers around control surfaces. So one of the great things that we love doing here at Avid is creating a space in your studio, whether that's at home, whether you're in a facility working in a recording studio. But the idea of being able to have some tactile control over everything that's happening. So not just the faders on the mix to be able to turn stuff up and down, but also to be able to control and pan and really have a hands-on feel for the automation. Of course, all of that then goes, you've got to be able to render that out into a format that is then deliverable to be able to hear everything, right? So it's really that simple. I don't want to overcomplicate it. So if we can just go to the next slide, we can kind of quickly just I'll give a kind of an example, a couple of examples. So again, everything centers in Pro Tools Ultimate, right? That's where everything kind of starts. That's where the creation starts. All the work is being done in Pro Tools Ultimate, and all of the key Dolby Atmos functions are directly embedded within the software. Okay, we've got many different ways to kind of access and leverage the power of being able to, have these larger sessions, being able to handle all of those beds and objects. So for us, along with Pro Tools Ultimate, Pro Tools HDX, our DSP acceleration technology, is a very big part of that. Now, we also have HD native, so being able to leverage some DSP that'll handle the mix bus. Actually, Matt actually is leveraging HD native technology. So he's not using HDX, he's using HD native, and then leveraging the Dolby audio bridge as well, right? So HDX, this is our flagship DSP acceleration technology. It's the thing that Avid is probably best known for. It powers so many huge mixes, and really gives the user the ability to have all of this power at their fingertips. And this can also be the heart of some very big, large, immersive Dolby Atmos mixes. I'm sure we'll show off and in a great way and show you exactly what that means. We love kind of seeing that. Now, as far as the input, your I/O and monitoring, of course, our Matrix and our Matrix Studio, our flagship audio interfaces. We've partnered with NTP DAD and have created these boxes that are just powerhouse. They sound amazing. They're extremely flexible. Specifically like with the Matrix, you're able to actually add all different kinds of cards. And if you wanted to tune your room, you can add an SPQ card. You've got different options for MADI, for different kinds of IO. It's extremely flexible, all being able to be routed using DADMAN software. And then of course you having your monitor control as well. And then again, going back to the control surfaces, being able to have tactile feel of your mixes. So our Avid S4 and S6 control surfaces are kind of the go-to. But actually here in my room, I'm using the Avid S1s. So you can actually do a really decent bit amount of immersive type mixing on even those. Of course, if you're going to be doing bigger, more professional mixes, you're probably going to want to end up sitting behind an S4 or an S6. And then of course you've got your options as far as rendering. You've got a couple different ways to render. You've got the Dolby production suite. And then of course you've got the actual renderer as well. So next slide, if we can. So to me, this is the final component, the final piece of the puzzle as it pertains to musicians when they're when we're talking about creating, and that's Avid Play. So Christine talked a little bit about it. I think Matt might have mentioned it as well. So Matt is one of the early adopters also of being able to deliver music in Dolby Atmos using Avid Play. So Avid Play is basically, it's a component of Avid Link. So if you're familiar with Avid Link, it's kind of it's an application that we've created. It really started off as a more of a community application, which really allows all users, Avid users, to be able to have a place at kind of a centralized location via software, something that kind of sits in the background on their computer, whether it's Mac or PC, and allows folks to be able to search for each other. And if you're looking for talent to collaborate with, you can do that. And it kind of grew from there. So now it's become kind of a software hub for your Pro Tools installs, your Sibelius installs, your plugin updates. All of that stuff gets updated there. We're continuing to drive growth there and do more on that side of things. But we also added Avid Play last year. So Avid Play is a component of Avid Link that allows users to be able to get their music out to pretty much any streaming service globally, wherever in the world they are. So it could be Apple Music, Tidal, Amazon, you name it. They're all there. And Avid doesn't take any of the money. All the money stays with the creator. So everything's managed there. Everything is tracked there. You're able, you keep 100% of your rights, and it's really great. So moving forward from that, just a few months ago, we introduced the ability for users to be able to export their immersive, their Dolby Atmos music mixes, their ADM files, and actually publish them to streaming services that support Dolby Atmos. So right now it's Tidal and Amazon Prime Music, but more are definitely going to be on the way. And this is just a great way for musicians, creators who are working on their own music and want to be able to get that stuff out there to do so and keep all the rights. You figure out how you want to split revenue if you're collaborating with different folks. You have full management of all of that. So, and you're able to distribute your ADM files, get them out pretty much immediately. You set your schedule. You set, when the release dates are. And again, this is all trackable. So you're able to distribute everything in the highest quality, 192 kilohertz at 24-bit in Dolby Atmos. So your ADM files directly coming from the renderer out of Pro Tools Ultimate with your Dolby renderer. You've got your file, you get it, you basically upload it. You literally will upload it using Avid Play, fill everything out and get it pushed out. It's really amazing. And again, I think it's important to understand that Avid or Dolby, we're not taking any of that. You keep all of that. That this is your creation. I'm kind of staying focused on this because I think it's a very important piece of the puzzle, because we know that someone was asking earlier, what are the plans about getting the tools into the creator's hands. This is a part of that. Being able to being able to get your stuff out there in an efficient way that you're managing, I think is great. And Christine mentioned that even the major labels are happy with this. Of course, they're happy with it because that's driving growth for them, and that's driving, just great listenership across the board. So if we can go to the next slide. So yeah, so as I mentioned, you're able to distribute these files right now, currently, to Tidal, Hi-Fi, and Amazon Music HD. Of course, future services will be made available at some point. So some of the pricing is listed here, and I apologize, this is listed in US dollars, but if you head to the Avid site and go to the Avid Play section, the pricing should be listed in your currency. So, just to give you an idea, the unlimited plan, which gives you basically, you can upload as many ADM files as you'd like annually. That's $49.99 US a year. So that gives the user the ability to distribute unlimited albums and singles in both Atmos and stereo. So you're not limited to just Atmos. If you wanted to deliver stuff in stereo, you actually have the ability to do that. And it supports pretty much any way that you want to package your music, whether it's a single, an EP, an album, you can do that. I should also mention, I think it was in the previous slide, and I should have mentioned it. We're actually giving you tools to be able to help market your stuff via social media and different platforms. And I think that's obviously another really big piece of the puzzle. And again, you have full control of that. So if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so here's just a quick look at the plans. If you just wanted to do a single, that's $4.99 a year. Lifetime would be $9.99. You're able to do that outright. So just a quick look. I think the value is great. And again, you're able to track all of this stuff directly within the Avid Link app in the Avid Play section, and it just makes it really easy. So I hope that's helpful. I hope you take advantage of that. I mean, I know even though I'm signed to a label, I still have the ability to be able to publish music independently, and I am absolutely going to be leveraging this myself. So let's see. I think we've got time for one quick question. Carlos Vela wants to ask, sorry, I'm misconnecting with Christine. Are there any articulation mechanisms between schools and Dolby in an effort to enable curriculum delivery for Dolby Atmos? So I can actually answer that for Christine. Of course, if she's still here, she's welcome to come and answer. The answer is yes. So I do know that there's curriculum that actually exists right now. There's so many schools that are teaching this, certainly here in the States, and actually we know that this is happening across the globe as well. But yes, I mean, the short answer is yes. And I saw that Christine just popped back on. Did you want to answer that?
There is actually, and it's good. We're also very open to suggestions. But yes, there are a number of not only schools but also academies. And Blackbird is a good example, and the 1500 is a good example, as well as Berklee School of Music and New York City College, and the list is actually much longer. So so we're certainly happy to share more information about that. Greg is certainly knowledgeable and capable of doing that. You can also reach out to us directly. And again, we're also open to suggestions.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine. So I think that is basically my time. This has been a real pleasure. I'm actually going to hang out because I want to see Daniel. I want to see Will. And of course, I want to see Ozzy from Netflix. This is just really cool. It's an honor to be here. But for now, I'm going to turn my camera off. But before I do that, I'd again like to say thank you wherever you might be joining, wherever in the world you might be. Thank you so very much. I hope you all continue to stay safe. And thank you for being here. And Mr. Daniel Lovell, I'd like to invite you back to the virtual stage.
All right. Thanks very much, Greg. Interestingly, as we cross over into talking about post-production with Atmos, I've actually had quite a bit of fun myself doing some Atmos music mixes and have used the Avid Play to upload some ADM files directly there. Actually, there was a question, excuse me, that's been sitting there for a little while from an anonymous attendee. I just wanted to answer that quickly because it's been there for a while and that person might be hanging out listening for an answer. So how are mixes sent to clients for approval? Now, one of the great things about Atmos is it does, with the renderer, allow you to have a lot of re-renders to different formats as you're going along. Of course, if you're listening to a final mix with a near field or a theater environment, it's going to be best, but that's absolutely possible. Yes, you can, with certain devices, listen to the exported files. I suggest you get in touch with someone from Dolby in your area to help you with that. And then a question about title, although I think Greg answered that earlier. Essentially, we take the ADM file that's exported out of the renderer and upload that to the different services that support that. So from the Avid Play point of view, we just upload the ADM file. So that's universal across there. So next I want to invite Will Files. Like I did saying, much like Greg earlier, a good friend, but also a fantastic sound supervisor, sound designer, and re-recording mixer. So welcome, Will.
All right, did I figure out how to turn on my video here?
Yes, you can absolutely do that. I think it'll probably switch on in just a second. Will, I'd love it if you could just tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and the kind of things that you work on a day-to-day basis. We can see some of the titles that you've worked on here in front of us now, but I'd love if you could give us a little idea of the kind of things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
You know, my day-to-day changes a lot, actually. Some days I'm here in the home studio and I'm doing sound design, which is something that I did some of before quarantine, but these days I'm basically doing all my sound design in the home studio, which is actually not so bad. Kind of miss the camaraderie of being with the team, but it's also nice to be at home.
Yeah.
Then I'll flip between that and mixing. And usually when I'm mixing, I've actually done some mixing here during quarantine at the home studio, but mostly I'm going into Sony or Warner Brothers or Deluxe or Technicolor, you know, one of the bigger stages in town, which actually I'll be doing tomorrow. So we're about to start the final mix for Ghostbusters.
Awesome.
Finally, after being on hiatus for 6 months, basically. But that'll be fun. I'll be, you know, going in and wearing a mask all day mixing, and that's sort of the new normal.
So I think one of the things that's interesting is looking at the titles that you've been working on. There's a real mix of film, streaming, and other formats. How do they differ for you when you're working on them?
You know, they don't differ that much. There's a little bit of an adjustment that you might make based on what the target format is going to be. For example, I mixed a film for Netflix recently, and we decided to mix it in a smaller mixing theater. It's still a theatrical mixing theater, but not sort of the size of you know, like a lot of the mixing theaters that we mix in are somewhere in the order of 200 to 500 seat theater sizes, because normally we're mixing for, you know, if you're doing Venom or something like that, or Star Wars, you're assuming it's going to play in these really big multiplex rooms that have literally hundreds of people, and they have a certain sort of sound characteristics, so we tend to work in those kinds of rooms. For a Netflix film or any other sort of streaming title, it makes sense to still work in a room that's big enough to have multiple creatives in it, multiple mixers and sound editors, and more importantly, potentially multiple clients, that has a big enough sweet spot that everyone can get some sense of what the mix sounds like, but also balancing that against still hearing the detail that you're going to get in a near field environment. And you also sort of the way the dynamics play in a bigger room versus a smaller room. This is something that Ozzy and I have talked about at length in terms of what's the sort of perfect size mixing stage for a streaming product. Because you do have to balance those two things. It's, you know, trying to work in a room that is a little closer to what an average home theater is going to be versus having enough room to do the creative work in a sort of pleasant way for everyone. And of course, that's taken on a whole new factor with COVID, because now we have to make sure that we're all a certain space away from each other and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think, we've talked about this before when you've been in Japan with me, that there's an idea that this is, it makes it more difficult, or it takes a lot more time. So I'm kind of interested, when you start working in these larger formats, what's it offering both in benefits, and what are some of the challenges of it?
You just mean like in terms of immersive in general?
Yeah, just in general, like when you start out the project, how that impacts it as it goes through.
Well, to tell you the truth, it's one of those things where I think everyone assumes that it's much different to mix in Atmos than it is to mix in 5.1 or something like that. But once you have everything set up, once you have the technical side worked out in terms of your mixing template and the recording and of course the room monitoring and all that stuff, you're still just making a lot of the same kind of decisions that you would make in the course of a regular mixing session. So you're still deciding, the relative balance of things and where they're going to be in the room. And of course, now you've got more opportunities to put things in cooler places. But what I found is that it's kind of like working in the visual equivalent of like starting your mix in 4K and then mastering down to 2K and then to DVD and to lower resolutions. Because if you start with a bigger negative, start with a bigger master, then you can kind of go down the funnel in a way that is the creative intent is preserved. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think one of the interesting questions that came up before, that I know that we've talked about before, is starting with that bigger, larger, as you say, like the 4K version or the 8K version or whatever we're doing these days, down to a smaller version. But you've actually had quite good success with the Atmos mix being used for the 7.1, 5.1 and other re-renders as well. So I wondered if you had something to share about that.
Well, that was one of the things that we worked with Dolby on very early on, because we realized that there was this concept that if you started with the Uber mix and then you're able to derive everything from that would make the workflow much easier. Because I mean, who really has the time to mix the movie 2 different times? I mean, a lot of the early mixes that we did, like Brave and Star Trek Into Darkness, we started with the 7.1 mix, and then we did an Atmos mix, but then we also did a 5.1 mix, and then we also did a stereo mix. Sure. So it's sort of like starting in the middle and going both ways. It doesn't really make sense. So what's one of the things that we worked with Dolby early on about is, okay, how can we give the mixers the control that they need when they're making their down mixes, so that the machine can do the vast majority of the work. And I have to say, it's at a point now that I can dial in my settings in such a way that it 99%, the 7.1 and the 5.1 and even the stereo are 99% what I would expect. And then every now and then I might have to go in and tweak something, but that's actually becoming more the exception than the rule.
Yeah, I think it was we were talking another time, and we've talked about there's this sort of a really good partnership with Dolby and Avid, and I think you're talking about working on some of the very early films that were using some differently put together tools, and now that there's a very integrated path between Pro Tools and the renderer, and of course our surfaces that support that as well. And I think you summed it up pretty simply, but it makes quite a difference in your ability to work through things quickly.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the name of the game, especially when you have a backfield full of creatives and they have an idea. They usually want to hear it as fast as possible. And certainly when we started using Atmos, I mean, at least when I started using Atmos, it was super early days. We were beta testing it, basically. We were trying to figure out how it was going to work. And we were using, software that was, not released yet, not ready for prime time. But even once the first version was released and we were dealing with the plugin, and how that interfaces with the recorder and sort of injecting the Atmos workflow into the workflows that we were using at that time, which there was a lot more people using large format mixing consoles versus S6 wasn't really a thing when, actually S6 wasn't even around yet when Atmos first came out. So the tools have evolved to a point now where I think most mixers, any mixer who's done at least one Atmos project, I think, is not scared by it anymore.
Mm.
It's really, it's exciting now. It's like, we have a bigger canvas to paint on. And the workflow is established to the point now with all the integration in Pro Tools that it's like not really an issue.
Yeah, I think that's sort of an interesting part. Seeing it develop over the years, that it's very much part of the day-to-day workflow. There's a couple of actually questions before we jump into some sort of tips I wanted to talk about, but there's a couple of questions about working to different loudness levels between film and television. I know we're going to touch on that with Ozzy in the Netflix session, and I think you mentioned that for Netflix, obviously there's a different specification that you have to mix to what you would be doing for a film in the theater, and also working in smaller rooms, and about translation into different formats, whether that's going to end up being on a TV or a soundbar. I just wondered if you had a few comments around that area of dealing with. Obviously, there's a lot of creative opportunities, but you have to meet the technical requirements as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can share a couple little kind of tips and tricks that we've figured out along the way. Luckily the latest version of the Dolby Atmos production suite has loudness measurement built into it, which makes life a little easier. But it was easy enough to just measure. We would, measure the 5.1 re-render, basically, is how we would do it before. But something that we have been playing around with, me and Mark Patterson, on some of the Netflix stuff that we've done, like Stranger Things and this film that we just mixed, what we'll often do is sort of pick a starting point in terms of what monitoring level we're choosing. And we kind of do it a little bit by, our best guess in terms of what size room we're in. So like, for example, with Stranger Things, we decided to start with at 82 in the monitoring loudness. And we did our first pass, our first day of mixing. We sort of just did a quick pass of the episode. And then at the end of the day, we measured it. Mm-hmm. And we found we were a dB off of spec.
Right.
In fact, we were, if I remember, we were a dB low.
Okay, that's interesting.
So what we did is we turned the, we turned the volume down a dB, and then we turned the mix up a dB, and we kept it. You know what? Actually, it was the other way around. We went it up at 83. So it ended up being the kind of thing where we rely, because at least we're feature film mixers, so we rely more on our ears than mixing to a meter. So that's the trick that we use in terms of how do we still sort of mix the way we're used to mixing, but try to hit this dialogue normalization level, sort of, by feel almost more than by meter. And that's the way we came up to do it. It was like, let's just pick a sort of, ballpark arbitrary number. Let's mix the first pass, let's measure it. And then we can figure out, okay, where do we put the room so that we sort of automatically hit that number? And then sure enough, we put it at 83, and the next episode we hit it just sort of naturally. We hit it almost exactly on the number. So we've done similar things on other projects, and it actually works really well. I mean, obviously, if you're mixing a feature film for a theatrical release, you're always going to want to be at 85.
Yeah,
I'm a big believer in that in terms of, even in a small room, if it's calibrated correctly, if Dolby or somebody else has come in and lined the room up correctly, like even my home studio, I always work at 85, because I find that if I don't, when I do take it to a bigger stage, it's just always going to be off.
Right.
So
Well,
I
that's
work at 85 for theatrical.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a specific question about LKFS, and I know obviously in theatrical you've got more or less the full scale. It's interesting myself in some of the freelance work I've done. In some ways, I found some of the loudness measurements almost a little freer, in that you actually do have a little bit of space for some impact, some sudden, high transient audio. You just have to be a little careful about how large the sound is, or how long it stays at a high level after that. And so I guess that sort of falls into are you adjusting the way that you're mixing? Are you mixing perhaps slightly less dynamically for something that's going to be streaming in the end?
Well, Ozzy will probably get mad at me for saying this, but at least with Stranger Things, no. Like Stranger Things is highly dynamic.
Yeah.
As everyone who's seen the show can attest. But that's what works about the Netflix loudness spec, is that it's based on dialogue level.
Yeah.
So it's not really about dynamics. It's about where is that dialogue level at? So as long as you keep your dialogue in a really tight pocket, the audience is not going to be annoyed by some spikes and low, some dynamics in the rest of the mix, because as long as you can hear the dialogue, people don't get upset. That's the thing that makes people annoyed more than anything else, is, can I hear the dialogue?
Yeah.
And then they're chasing it on their remote control.
Well, that's exactly it. Always the dialogue that people are chasing with their remote. So that makes a lot of sense to me as well. So, talking about, I've got one of your sessions here that you were kind enough to send over. It looks like it's a effects Foley background sort of template session, and I wanted to have a quick look at how you organize a few things in there. But I wondered if you, before we jump into that, if you have any sort of general tips for people who are maybe breaking out of stereo or 5.1 or 7.1, and they're now looking to go to an immersive environment such as Atmos.
It kind of depends on how you like to work. I mean, I personally like to keep things pretty organized in my sessions, as you can probably see from just the layout of the session itself. I like to keep things simple and clear, and also fairly organized. So sometimes that ends up meaning that I have maybe more pre-dub groups than I need, because I want to keep all my explosions in one pre-dub, and I want to hear the debris in another pre-dub, and I want to hear the bomb whistles in another pre-dub, and I want to be able to set to, when the director says, hey, can I have more debris on that third explosion? It's easy for me to just grab that fader and turn it up. So because of that, even back in the older days, before the S6 came around, when I was mixing on the DFC, the Neve DFC, and I've continued this now in Pro Tools, is I like to organize my pre-dubs to include some objects. So every pre-dub group has a certain number of object tracks allocated within it. And then in the last couple of years, I've also started doing a thing where I will bus the rest of the tracks in that pre-dub group to those same objects, so I can do the object toggle if I want to. That means I have to use a lot more DSP to route everything. So it's a bit of a resource hog, but it's also, I found, just creatively, it's a really nice workflow for me as a mixer, because I can very easily say, okay, here's a bunch of stuff, like here's 6 mono sounds that make up this sound. And if I send all of those to object 1, and I click the object toggle, and then on the object 1 track that's below, that's hard assigned to object 1, I'll actually just make a region group, and I'll pan it on that with literally no audio going on that track, but that's where the pan lives for those 6 tracks that I've automated. So it's a bit of a more virtualized workflow, but for me it works great, because it means that I don't have to worry about if I have more sounds than fit into the 1 or 2 objects that I've allocated for that pre-dub.
Cool. So hopefully everyone can see my Pro Tools screen now. So actually, the way that you have this so tidy is almost deceptive. If we have a look at the system usage, there's something like 500 tracks or somewhere around that sort of number in this session. But you've gone through and you have some places to keep your pictures, guide mixes, then some VCAs. And then you've split all of your buses and your various effects groups out into folders. So it looks like you can kind of see one very large session all from one level.
Yeah. So it's very deceptively simple. But this is how I like to start my day is with a nice tidy session. And then it means that I can drill down to various things, depending on, okay, I want to do a backgrounds pass. Let me just open up the backgrounds. I want to get into the effects. Let me open up the effects. And you can see within that I've got it set up where there's a VCA followed by a folder with my with the tracks that belong to that pre-dub group.
So yeah, I thought it was interesting. There's a question in here which we can answer actually with this session, but as you mentioned before, you have all your tracks in here, as well as excuse me, as well as assigned to an object which you can flip. You've got object one there assigned to the multiple tracks as you mentioned. But one thing that I've always thought is really interesting about your sessions is the idea of dealing with, well, not all of my content or my sound design is immersive to start off with. It might be a mono source or a stereo source, or maybe even some 5.1 material. And I've always found it really interesting looking at your sessions that, for example, just off this first track here, you have these set of 4 effects return, and then also an effects send off to probably the LFE. So I thought that was quite an interesting kind of workflow thing. So I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about that.
Well, so basically, I do, like you said, I tend to, all the material that I get as a mixer, and even the material I cut, it tends to be mono and stereo. And rarely 5.1 or even more rarely 7.1. So the trick is to, how do you take that material and turn it into a big immersive Atmos mix? And one of the ways that I do that is I use stereo sends from every track, and they return to stereo reverb. So stereo in, stereo out. So the reason I use stereo sends versus mono sends is I found that especially if you have stereo source material, that it really does have a wider, nicer sound to it. So that's why I use stereo in. And then the reason I use stereo out is that I like having the ability to still pan things just with a regular panner. I do use spanner quite a bit, and occasionally I'll use I'll add some kind of a fancier 5.1 reverb if I want some specific effect that I want to use the whole 5.1 space. Like occasionally I'll use Revibe or Phoenix or one of those things that can do a true 5.1. But a lot of times, as you can see, these are all stereo returns. So the way I have it set up is that one stereo send feeds 2 stereo returns, and by default those are panned front and rear, and they're panned sort of a little bit, as you can see there, like a little bit in, towed a little bit in the front, and they're panned halfway between the sides and the rear and the back. And what's cool about this is then I can do I can actually put 2 different settings on those 2 reverbs. So if I wanted to do something like something really exotic, like a cave reverb or something, I could do like a medium chamber in the front part, and then I could do like a big echo tail, some kind of weird fluttery tail in the rear, so you get this like kind of cool multi-dimensional thing. Or sometimes, as you'll probably see, like if you open up the Effects Reverb 1 reverb there, it's just a room. It's just like a kitchen or something, right? Yep. And so then on the 1B return, which is the rear, that's the same kitchen, but it has a little increased time and a little increased size, and it has a little pre-delay on it. And so it's the same impulse response, it's the same space, but it's just a little bigger and it's a little delayed from the front. So you get what feels like a sort of very natural extension of what's in the front channels, but in the rear and separated a little bit. So you get this kind of multi-dimensional thing. And what's cool too is if you wanted to bus any of these things to a 712 bus or even to a stereo object and put it up on the ceiling or do whatever you wanted to, it's very easy to do that because they're just stereo tracks. Yeah. Once you get into 5.1 or anything above stereo, it gets a little more complicated in terms of your busing. So I tend to use that only for kind of special stuff.
Awesome. And there was another question we can actually answer. Someone was asking, how do you make sure that you're adhering to some of the specifications? Do you have a peak limiter on some of your masters? And actually, we can see that right here on these bus masters as well as some of the object masters. You actually have a peak limiter there just to make sure you catch anything, I guess, at that final stage before it goes out.
Yeah, I like to have a limiter on my tracks, and I also like to use, as you can see, a channel strip before that, so that my my main bus, excuse me, my main bus is getting filtered at about 20 hertz, so that nothing below 20 hertz is getting out to the main channels, because chances are you're not hearing anything in the main channels. I mean, at least in a mixing theater, below 30 hertz. But some home theater systems are crossed over to subwoofers on the main channels, and so they'll go all the way down to whatever the sub can do. So at least let's say 20 hertz. So you might be getting all this subsonic stuff happening in your main channels that you never knew about, especially if you're using synthesized sounds. And then if you flip that channel strip over to the LFE, you'll see that it's also doing the LFE filtration at 120 hertz to make sure that there's nothing above that. That's because sometimes you hope that all the subwoofers are filtered, but you can't really count on it. So these master faders are kind of my fail-safe.
Yeah.
You generally speaking, it's probably a good idea to put a limiter on your outputs. Some QC vendors will bounce things if there's actual clipping, and having a little limiter sitting right at 0.1 dB probably isn't going to change the sound of the mix that much. It does change it a little bit, but generally speaking, it's just it's fairly transparent.
Yeah.
And then in the case of something like Stranger Things, where we're mixing for a release spec that's a little bit less forgiving, there's a negative 2 dB limit on that. And so what Netflix recommends is to set your limiter at negative 2.3 dB, just to give yourself a little wiggle room there, because some limiters, like the Pro limiter, is actually very good at hitting the number exactly, but not every limiter is quite as good about hitting that number. And the reason, Ozzy can probably talk about this and maybe verify if my theory is right or not, but my assumption is that there's that limit is there, the negative 2 dB is there so that Netflix can, if you're a little bit off spec, Netflix can make that adjustment in their pipeline without clipping your mix.
Yeah, understood. So I think looking at your session, that would probably give people, a lot of good hints about how to set up and get ready. But one of the great things is that we'll touch on with Ozzy, that actually some of the projects that you've worked on are actually available as open source to download. And some of the things that you've got set up in your session here are also echoed in those mix and master sessions that are available. So we're going to touch on that with Ozzy in the next session. So
Yeah.
we're just about out of time on the session. There's just a couple of questions which I thought I would grab if I could. How do you control the parts of the mix that are very low and suddenly jump? Do you use limiters or some technique specifically for that?
Compression's always a good thing for that kind of problem. Transient shapers are also very useful for that kind of thing. Transients are often the thing that can make something sound kind of harsh and edgy. Ticky sounds, those kinds of things. If you look at them on the waveform, they're very tall compared to the rest of the sound. Something like Foley even, if you turn it down to the point where it's sitting well in the mix, that transient might still be poking out in a way that actually sounds like a digital tick. So that's something that I use a lot on my Foley tracks, and even on like ADR tracks and things like that, I'll use a transient shaper. Yeah. But yeah, compression limiting, that's always your friend. As you know, Daniel, I'm a big fan of multi-band compression.
Multi-band. Yeah, I was going to say, I know that we've talked about that quite a bit, just making sure that you control the harshness of the high end.
Yep.
and leave the sort of the power for the mids and lows to push through and give you that big feeling.
Yeah, because that's the it's the mids and low mids that or the lows and low mids that make things feel big, obviously, and they also tend to be the frequencies that are the least annoying to the ear.
Yeah.
It's all the dialogue frequencies, everything from, let's say, 1K to 8K that tend to be the most annoying to our ears. And actually, even above that, like I've found with sound effects and with dialogue, there's actually not much useful stuff above like 10K. Like a lot of the stuff that's above 10K tends to just be annoying for no good reason. Especially on cinematic horn speakers that maybe don't have the best resolution in those higher frequencies, so you get a lot more distortion.
Yeah.
When you're listening at home or on studio monitors, it's not going to be quite as apparent. So what I tend to do is take a lot of frequencies out below 10K and leave that for the music, because the music has all this nice air, and the background sometimes can have that kind of thing too. But a lot of times there's sounds in the backgrounds that you don't want that are up high, like whistles and hums and that kind of thing.
Cool. I think we're pretty much out of time. There's just one super quick question that sort of pertains to you talking about your different filtering on your groups before. And just one final question from someone on LinkedIn. Do you actually put a sub filter on your final output to make sure nothing too awry is happening in the very low end?
I don't filter the bottom end of the LFE track, if that's what the question is.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
I know some people do, but I don't, because I like to live on. But I do do a low pass filter, but I don't do a high pass filter on the LFE.
Understood. Cool. Well, thanks so much, Will. I know we could talk all day. So thanks for your time, and I hope we get another chance to talk in person soon, in Japan or somewhere else in Asia Pacific as soon as we can.
I can't wait to sit on. I can't believe I'm saying this. I can't wait to sit on a plane for 11 hours.
No, I'm looking forward to having you back, and thanks very much for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. All right, so we're just going to have a quick look at some of our solutions that we have from Avid to allow you to build solutions for Dolby Atmos mixing for film and television. I've purposely spent more time with Will. I want to go over this part relatively quickly. Most of it, as Greg said before, cross between music and film and television as far as the equipment to use to get there. But it starts off with an important slide, if we can, King. One thing that we've mentioned again and again is that Pro Tools is extremely well integrated with the Dolby panning and rendering system. We introduced 712 tracks and buses throughout Pro Tools, which is the main bus format that goes into the renderer. We have object panning directly from our native panner, so it just means that you can use Pro Tools more or less like you always have. You just have extra dimensions to work with. Pro Tools connects directly to the renderer within the software. It doesn't require any other install or anything like that. It just has to be able to see the renderer on the same machine or on the network if you're using either an HT-RMU or a cinematic RMU. We have routing control, which actually Will mentioned in his section there, that sometimes he'll be sending the audio to a bus and within a 712 bus, and other times he will turn it into an object, so we can actually change that in real time. One of the things that we didn't really talk about so far is some of these bigger sessions end up being across multiple computers, so being able to record and play back and decide where you record the metadata for all of this panning is really important. So that's also integrated into Pro Tools. And of course, as you can see on some of the graphics here, the S6, S4, for example, have a really good representation of the panning in a 3D environment. If you could go over to the next slide, please. But one thing I've thought is that it can be quite scary to get into this. One of the questions that we had before is how do you start? Where do you begin? Now, actually, the Dolby Atmos production suite and Pro Tools Ultimate both have trials available. So providing that you have a computer that's capable of processing it, so a reasonably recent computer, you can actually start listening and trying these things yourself without having to make a large investment in a lot of equipment. And as both Matt said in the much earlier music session, and as I have here at home as well, you can actually use the binaural headphone output, which has been improved a lot in the most recent release of the software, to begin your mixing and your pre-production and really get your head around how um, Atmos mixing with Pro Tools works. So don't forget that option's out there for you. If you already have Pro Tools Ultimate, actually the production suite is not particularly expensive at all, and it's a great way to start getting into that world. And because the Dolby software allows you to monitor from headphones, stereo 5171, all up to larger formats, there's no reason that you can't begin experimenting with this with most likely the equipment that you have now. So I just wanted to touch on that first. So if we can move over to the next slide, okay. So it's much like Greg said, it's a case of combining the tools that make sense for your system. Whether that's a control surface from the free Avid control application to give you some levels and some basic panning. What's your host? Are you running native, or do you need DSP power because you're using extremely large sessions? Then with your I/O, are you just listening with headphones, or do you need multiple outputs to control speakers? And then it's a case of choosing the right solution for you as far as the rendering software goes. Uh, is it the rendering software, the Dolby Atmos production suite running on the same machine? Is it an HTRMU, the Dolby mastering suite running on a separate computer? And then if you're dealing with theatrical, obviously there's another theatrical RMU as well. So you can kind of pick and choose within these things to get you up to the level that you need to be to start experimenting, doing pre-production, maybe some QA, and then finally mixing. So there's many ways to get into it. It doesn't have to be a huge obstacle to start looking at this technology. So if we can move on to the next slide. So a really simple option with the fantastic Matrix Studio that was released just last year, we worked with Dolby, and we now have the option to use the Dolby Audio Bridge, which gives you 130 channels between Pro Tools and the Dolby Atmos production suite, giving you a direct connection for all your beds and objects into the renderer. We allowed the renderer software to then use your HD native or your HDX hardware to output to an immersive environment, whether that's 714, 916, or another format like that. So that gives you a really nice high quality interface with monitor control that's monitor controllable by Yukon as well. So moving on to a slightly bigger system. With a similar system, if you maybe don't need the full 128 tracks in some circumstances, you could actually have an external renderer. In this case, we've got a 64-channel Dante connection to a Dolby Atmos renderer using a Mac there. And by having the renderer running on a separate computer, you just have more confidence in that the deliverables that you create are going to be correct for what they need to be. But again, this is where things like speaker processing, making sure your EQs and your delays are set correctly. And in most territories around the world now, there's Dolby staff that can give guidelines, as well as excellent information from companies like Netflix about what kind of room you should be starting to work on these contents. So that's one option. As we grow into slightly larger situations, something like the full-size Matrix gives you more options again to connect multiple Pro Tools system, in this case, a Pro Tools system with the full 128 channels connected via Dante using a Dante 128 card. And in this case, we've got an example of a Dante and or a MADI HTRMU or the theatrical renderer out to whatever your monitoring environment is. In this case, the connection isn't on the same machine. Pro Tools and the rendering software is working across two different machines, but fortunately Dolby has done an excellent job of having remote control software for those computers. So even though it's on a completely different computer, you can control the RMU very much like it's running on that local machine. Moving on to even bigger systems. Now, this is some of the stuff that Will was talking about previously. Although the systems are very powerful and you can do a lot in one system these days, there are situations where you need to split out to even larger systems where you're running multiple Pro Tools systems in sync with each other to play back the various parts of your mix, and then recording them and all of that metadata to another system. So it may seem complicated, but I think really the key is to see that there is kind of options really from the very, very beginning and very, very simple systems all the way to highly complex systems. And I think, as Will said in his session earlier on, there was a lot of external consoles, but with S6 and the controllers and the deep integration of Pro Tools with the renderer and also the Matrix and Matrix Studio for monitor control gives you a really excellent way to control what could seem like a very complicated environment, but in a pretty simple and comprehensive integrated fashion. So that's been, it's taken us a while to get to this point in partnering with Dolby and other manufacturers to make sure that we provide the best solution, because ultimately we would love for people to be spending their time being creative and spend their time mixing, not spending their time dealing with technical issues. Now, one of the things that has led to this huge sorry, let me review quickly. So we sort of have scalable solutions through from education, pre-production, all the way to the biggest film mixing stages that there are. It's extremely integrated into the rendering solution, a direct connection. And because our software and our surfaces are all Yukon controllable, or Yukonized, as we sometimes say, that makes it very easy to control everything. We have a lot of I/O options that allow you to really choose what's right for your room. And one of the nice things is that you can import the ADM file, which is created within the Dolby Atmos production or mastering suite, import that back into Pro Tools. So it gives you a very good way of keeping track of those master files and re-importing them for use again later. So that's what I've sort of got to say about the technology. It's really great now that as there's this explosion, the technology has matured to a point where it's made it quite accessible for a lot of people. Where it was, when as Will said, when he started out, it was somewhat experimental, but now we're in a place where things are quite well developed and the systems are quite mature to deliver these systems. And I guess that takes us on to the next segment with Ozzy Sutherland from Netflix, and partially about what has led to this explosion of immersive content. Now, we do have a few questions here. We are running a little bit short on time. I don't know if you're still on, Will, at all. One of these questions is for you.
I am. I'm here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that'd be great. Just a quick question. Could you elaborate a little bit on your reverb placement for Atmos? Are these reverbs going to a bed, or do you end up treating them as objects? Do you like having some reverb in the ceiling? And I love your tidy session. Yes, I love your tidy session too.
Me too. It's the only way I can kind of keep my head on straight in a big complicated session is to try to keep it organized. Yeah, so generally speaking, my reverbs do go to the bed. I have on occasion put reverbs on the ceiling. I would say that generally speaking, when I want to do something really exotic with a reverb, like put it in an object, put it on the ceiling, you know, do something kind of wacky, I will often audio suite some reverb and put that into an object and pan that. And sometimes I do a trick where if it's a really quiet scene and I have something very specific panning through the room, like I did this a lot in The Invisible Man. It's very quiet, and you might hear just, you know, one single sound, maybe a voice or maybe footsteps or something moving around the room. I will take the sound, the dry signal, and I'll print a audio suite reverb that goes behind it, and I'll put them in two separate objects that I'll basically pan the dry signal, and then I'll copy that pan to the wet signal, and then I'll put a little bit of additional size on the reverb, the wet sound. So you basically have like a halo that tracks behind whatever the dry sound is. So you get this feeling like it sort of blends between the speakers a little more nicely. And it just feels a little more natural to me. And then sometimes I'll also put some of the bed reverb on that dry sound, so it also has a, you know, three-dimensional sound to it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that extra bit of input. I'm sure Alex will absolutely appreciate you giving a bit more insight on that. Thanks very much again, Will, and thanks for staying on to answer the question.
No problem.
Yes, next we have Ozzy Sutherland from Netflix. Hello, Ozzy. How are you doing?
Do you want a drink of water before we go? Come on.
Me? I can have a sip of tea here.
Some tea. I'll take a sip too, just for it.
So hey, Ozzy, great to have you on here. And as I think I mentioned earlier, and I think everyone must be absolutely clear about that, Netflix has been a huge influence on really pushing for high quality, impactful, and really amazing content. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think if you switch to the next slide, it kind of explains our philosophy around some of this. So, you know, what is higher quality audio at Netflix? A lot of people ask us that question, including Will. And I've had many a conversation and sit downs, and even I see some people on this webinar I've spoken to before. But we look at it as, you know, being captured on the day by highly qualified mixers and operators, and industry-wide best practices. Now, what does that actually mean? Like, you know, you're really capturing the audio on set as best as you can, because there's a bit of a philosophy here to fix it in pre as much as you can so that they don't have to go and fix it in post the whole time, which I think mixers are probably applauding that because they love hearing that it's fixed in pre so that they don't have to spend the time on the stage or anywhere else to fix it in post. And we say to mix in a Netflix-sized stage. Will touched on this a bit. You know, we've got it in feet and meters for everyone out there. But, you know, for APAC, it's a 9 meter by 12 meter by 4 meter size room. So it's like a large living room, we would say would be ideal to mix a Netflix show. You try to pre-mix as much in sound edit as possible. So if you're editing the show, you're pre-mixing, getting pre-dubs correct, getting things out there, and you know, you take the time to craft it ahead of time. We have a minimum of 5.1 and 2.0, but where we can and whenever it's possible, depending on the title, we want immersive audio as the top level master, and you know, you can trim all the passes for the lower formats. And as I like to tell everybody out there, you got to remember that audio is 51% of the experience, and that's according to us, the sound guys out there. I think everybody will appreciate that. And that's my big 51%. It's kind of my nickname even in Netflix now on my team. So I roll with it. So that's the gist of it. But why do we do this is the other question, you know, because as you all know, Netflix is worldwide. So you have Netflix in Japan, you have Netflix in Singapore, you have it all over in India, all over the world. And there's shows that are localized for all those regions. And so we have to optimize the the viewer's audio experience for everyone. And that's particularly done if we try to capture it best on set. And then, like I said before, you're editing and mixing. So you're spending more time to craft the, as we like to say, the sonic continuity of the title. And we look to get a lot of feedback. And it's a big feedback culture at Netflix, where we talk to all of our vendors and hear what their feedback is on the specs and everything, and whether they like it and how they want to use it. So it's essential to us to talk to everyone, and we appreciate all that feedback. So don't ever be afraid to talk to us at all. This is a blog that was done in 2019, I believe. It's about how we brought higher quality audio to Netflix, and the story of it. And it started with a show that Will works on, but he wasn't on that season of it. It was Stranger Things. And I think you guys will be sharing out that link to this blog so people can read it and spend the time. But it's a great little testament on how it all happened at the studio and how we brought that higher quality sound out there to everyone.
I think this question has come up multiple times now in the chat. Is just really talking about dialogue and loudness, and I know that the next few slides touch on this area. So I'm really keen to hear, allow you, Ozzy, to share with everyone why you guys, this is such a crucial part to what you require.
It absolutely is. I mean, Will touched on it earlier. It's the number one problem, the dialogue problem. It's the number one customer audio complaint. I can't hear the dialogue. Dialogue is king. No matter what language or what show you're watching, you want to hear what they're talking about. It is the story. It drives the story. It sucks you in and brings you into the whole experience. So initially, a customer will set the level according to what they're hearing on the dialogue, and then they change the volume as desired. So the previous spec, that we had, set the level according to an overall full mix. So that results in inconsistent dialogue, all across the service. It's inconsistent for episodes within a series. It's inconsistent from title to title. So I think the next slide will actually show you a measurement that we've done. And you can see here, like episode 5 is measured at a different LUFS than episode 10's overall loudness here. So it can vary within a series depending on the storytelling and what's going on in the audio in that series. So that's a big thing. So you can go to the next one there. What is dialogue gated measurement? We get this question a lot around the world. So it's basically dialogue intelligence. This has been around for a while, but we decided to go to this measurement, about 2 years ago. And it's, everyone's adjusting the volume according to what your audibility and intelligibility of the dialogue happening. Everybody hears differently, but you set the dialogue at a fixed level and mix the other content around it. So that's like kind of what Will was explaining there too. And you're measuring loudness only on the segments of program that actually contain the dialogue. So you can, I know Will said, I'm probably going to get mad about this. I'm not mad. It's actually true. It's what we do at Netflix. It's like you can be a bit more dynamic in your mix. But if you're too dynamic, you're going to run into issues in the long run. So it allows for consistent dialogue levels across the service. It makes it easier for the sound crew. So, the room reference level, it gets to be the same for every title. And like he said on Stranger Things, they started at 82, they ended up at 83, and then they hit the spec the whole way for 10 episodes or 8 episodes. It was just not a problem. And I went over there during that time, and they were cranking away like it was nothing. So there's no post-mix loudness correction needed if everything is hitting the spec. And, one of the things Scott Kramer does, who's, the manager of sound here on the CTI team, he's working closely with the EBU and ITU for all the global considerations around this. And the ideal thing is we want your remote to stay on a table or couch while you binge and do your thing and watch the show. We don't need you having to adjust it. Maybe you adjust it because the kids go to sleep or something, but that's about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And I think, especially, on a service like Netflix, the content is just such a wide variety of stuff. There has to be a way like this to make sure that there's some consistency between them. And obviously dialogue is so crucial to the things that we do. That makes a lot of sense to me.
It's absolutely crucial. And there's a lot of tools, and I think I talk about it here, is there's a lot of meters that support dialogue gated measurement, especially in your ecosystem there, and a third party ecosystem like NewGen, Isotope, Signum, Waves. They all have Netflix presets built in. They've worked with our teams over here to have the Netflix dialogue gated spec built into them, and they actually can support and measure dialogue gated measurement, which is great that the ecosystem's trying to make it more readily available for everyone out there.
Exactly. Now, I think the next thing actually, again, this question came up just talking about
Yes.
References and listening levels in the room. So this is interesting as well.
So as you heard Will speak about, the big dub stages, as you can see in this picture here, that's the Cary Grant Theater at Sony in in Culver City. It's one of the biggest dub stages in the world. That's a cinema reference level room, so 85 dB all day long. What we recommend as much as possible is you're at TV reference level, which is, like Will was speaking about, 82 dB and ideally 79 dB. But you, as mixers, it's up to you to kind of figure out where it's most comfortable, so then you're working to be in spec. And it's really an important thing to understand, is that you can't just crank the room up and expect, and because over time and as you're mixing everything else, you'll fatigue yourself, and things will end up in the wrong places. So it's very important to have your reference level correct as you start off on a title. And if you're going to be doing 8 to 10 episodes or anything like that, you want to keep that consistent as you go along. So that allows you to be able to check all the versions of it. If you're doing Atmos or 5.1 or stereo, you've got to make sure you're ensuring the stereo quality of this, because remember, at the same time we're out there, we're not dropping this in a theater like that size. It's for people who are on their mobile device. It's for people who are at home on a sound bar. It's for people who are on the train watching it, and then they end up at home and they put it back on their TV or their laptop, and they're trying to finish off this title. So the main thing here is that the peaks can't exceed -2 dBFS. The loudness metering, the EBU R128 standard is 23 LKFS program gated. The Netflix spec is -27 LKFS dialogue gated. So as we talk about like a dynamic range, also for the loudness range, 4 is usually not dynamic when you're looking at it. 20 is very dynamic, and 23 is like cinema level. So, if you're at like, between 9 and 18 on your dynamics range, you're probably in a good place for anything that's going to land on Netflix. But if your mix is very dynamic, that's okay. It'll probably be fine. But, if you're up in that cinema range, things are the QC side of it will be the first part to hit you and let you know that too.
Okay. Now moving on. I mean, there's quite a lot of information there, but I know that one of the things that Netflix has done an excellent job of all the way through is making sure that all the deliverable requirements and the specification guidelines that you guys have are publicly available.
Absolutely. Anyone can take this link, and I'm sure you guys are sharing this out on your socials and everywhere, and it's help.prodigal.com. And you can get the Netflix mix sound specifications and best practices, and also the home Atmos deliverable requirements. And they're out there for everyone to read and check out. We have no problem sharing that. And it's a testament to our team, and what we do.
This next thing, I love this, Ozzy. There's a couple of shows out there that have just amazing sort of statistics of how many different languages they support on launch, and this is something probably quite new until a service like Netflix comes along. So M&Es and localization, especially we're in APAC time today. Thanks for staying up. It's hugely important.
Yeah, no, this is a big one because, studios dub in up to 40 languages, but like a title like Stranger Things, it's usually in about 9 languages. But remember, when you're doing animation, and we do quite a bit of animation, children can't read. So you dub in up to 37 languages or so, and you have to have that content available for them because they want to watch it, and they need to be localized. So there's no secondary audio. And many viewers actually prefer the dubs in their language. So they really want to have that experience and hear it in their native Castilian, or their in Japanese, or in whatever part of the world we're in. We want them to have the right experience. So it's really important, this whole music and effects and localization aspect. And it's kind of it's been a common thing around most studios here in the US and UCAN and in EMEA and stuff, but it's fairly new for APAC because you're now taking your content and you're putting it on a global platform. And that's the biggest thing. It's like your content is going to be seen everywhere in all the different countries across the world. So it's in your best interest to make sure that the M&E is budgeted correctly, and you take the time to, editorial helps you with an M&E, and you set aside time to check them, because it's really important to be able to get it so they can do an English dub or Spanish dub or whatever, French dub of that show, and be able to deliver that in a timely fashion. So the next slide actually, I think also touches on this. So this is a link that I think it's after this, which we'll share out, that explains to you how to make a music and effects mix for Netflix, or for anything basically. And it shows you the basic signal flow of it: dialogue stem, flip stem, music stem, effects stem, into some type of console or Pro Tools or however you're doing it. And then you get the M&E and a fully filled effect stem that goes out. So the next slide actually shows, here's a link to a YouTube video that Scott actually made to show you how to enable doing a better music and effects creation tutorial. And it's out there for all of you to watch. And if you have any questions, honestly, you can feel free to reach out to us, and we can get you any information you need and on this. And our dubbing teams are incredible at Netflix, so they're happy to help out also when it comes to this. And it's really important to get M&E correct for the dubs.
It's interesting, isn't it? I know, working on television in New Zealand, when we worked on international projects, it was a requirement, and it wasn't as easy to sort of get the knowledge and the background of how to do it. So having those guidelines and those tutorials really helps. So I think this is it. I mean, the whole topic has been about immersive audio, Dolby Atmos, moving into this next world of sound. But Netflix have been a massive adopted this technology massively, and it'd be really interesting to know why you guys have done that. Why your team?
So I like this slide. I made this slide personally. It's big things have small beginnings, right? So it's like, that's Our Planet shot from Our Planet. And when you think about it, I was there for the early days of Atmos, and Will and I spent time on that. And we saw what the tools were, and we saw where it was going. And I remember the first time I actually heard it, I was like, whoa, what is this? What is going on here? This is crazy. But at Netflix, we've definitely adopted the amount of Dolby Atmos titles are really growing. And I think if you can switch to the next slide here, you kind of can see, if you actually go into your Netflix, if you go into the actual Netflix experience here and go and search just Dolby Atmos, you'll see a bunch of titles that will show up. And these are what are out there: films, documentaries, all different formats are mixed and done in Dolby Atmos. And then they usually are also in Dolby Vision too. So we are trying to give the highest quality experience to our viewers, in that they can have, a lot of TVs, LG, Sony, everybody out there have Dolby Vision. They're enabled for Dolby Vision. They can also do Dolby Atmos over ARC to whatever, sound bar or system that people are using at home. So the titles are definitely growing. It's an experience, basically. We're trying to bring a cinematic experience for everyone at home to all of our viewers, and let them experience something that totally immerses them into whatever title they're experiencing, and at any given time.
So I think, where do you think this lands up? I think earlier on, excuse me, We heard from Christine that she thought as well, you know, this eventually ends up in the hands of everyone. Where do you think the future lies?
I won't go as crazy on the future as you would think. I mean, I think the future is bright, and I think the future is going to be. I mean, there's a lot of technology out there and a lot of great stuff happening in this space, and immersive is here to stay because everybody wants to be immersed into whether they're on their phone, whether they're on their TV at home, whether they're on their laptop, they're sucked in and they want to finish this show and watch it and be immersed into the whole thing. And given even the whole pandemic times that we're into, everybody's at home, multiple people are on different devices in different parts of the house trying to get an experience and watch something. I think the future is bright for it. And I think it's going to be a well-adopted technology across the way. And for a deliverable too, Atmos is a great piece. It's just like Dolby Vision. We're able to keep everything together within the Dolby Vision delivery specs. And the same thing would lie for Atmos too, for the future, to keep it as a great container for delivering the files.
I think that's one thing Will's always come back to is you're keeping like a very high res version
Exactly.
of the audio in its separate parts to be used however you need to.
Exactly. That's totally it. So I think it's gonna be a great future, and we are definitely here for everyone. And I think that the next slide here that I wanted to touch on quickly was we are all about having open content out there for anybody to use. So we worked on a little anime short based out of Japan with a production IG. Haruka from our team out there started this project, and then I came in after and said we got to get Will to add some sound to this project. And we have an opencontent.netflix.com. You can go there right now and you can download all these little titles that you see here, including Sol Levante, its entire Pro Tools Atmos session, the entire Atmos master files, the actual picture files are available there for it. And you can play with it. And you can use it on your systems and see exactly what was done. You can see exactly how Will mixed it and how all the automation is there available, and all his busing, his multi-band limiting, his limiters are all inside of the session readily available. So this is something we really like to do over here, and we want to open up the industry as much as possible and allow people to play with it. And it's been a great thing to actually hear from people in other parts of the world, from Africa to Asia to Latin America. People have reached out to us saying thank you for sharing these projects. They would have never had the opportunity to open up somebody's Atmos files along with all these other files and be able to play with them and use them. And we're all about sharing this content with anyone. And I welcome anyone to just go out there and grab this and do that. And especially anyone who's going to be working on an upcoming Netflix project that is going to be done in Atmos. It's a great starting point.
Absolutely. Now there's several questions about, but they're quite technical in nature. Well, I say quite technical, mostly about loudness and those kind of questions. Now, you guys have great resources that are available, and as you said, the team at Netflix is absolutely open to being reached out to, as are we at Avid, to try and help you however you can. So there is some questions there that are primarily about specifications. Catherine's got a question down here. Thanks so much. No, thank you for watching. The open source, what is the minimum specs for Pro Tools? Now, this is a good question. The mix session is fairly intensive, but you can have a look at the master session, and even a relatively modest system should be able to play the master session back. The mix session, you do need a fairly significantly powered Pro Tools machine that you would be using for a larger mix. But you can just perhaps try importing parts of those sessions. You don't have to import it all. Perhaps use the session import data, just bring in some of it and have a look at how it's been set up there. Catherine. So
I wanted
hopefully
to
that's
touch on
helpful.
one thing.
Yeah,
Dan,
sure, of
sorry.
course,
If you
please.
can go back to that last slide, any questions that anyone has in the region for us, please reach out to that Netflix email link and send over your questions, and we will find the time to get to them and answer them. And any questions that we may have missed here, feel free. And I'm sure they'll share this after also.
Yes, exactly. So I think that is, we are at time for us today. Hopefully this has been informative and helpful. And as I say, as a member of the Avid staff working in the APAC region, I'm really, really happy that we were able to do something during our time. So often we're watching replays, but today we've been able to do it live in APAC, and we hope to do more in the future. I thank Ozzy, Matt, Christine, and of course Will for joining us today, as well as Greg. Thank you so much for your time, and this session will be available in the future again for replay. And so I thank everyone for joining. Thank you for your questions, and look forward to seeing you all again on the next event. So thanks very much everyone for your time, and thanks to all the guests.
Thanks, Daniel.
See you, Daniel. See you,
Thanks,
Greg.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Jeremy.